Welcome to Marcos and James, the Lisbon Pirates podcast. Good morning, Tiago.
Good morning, Mark.
How are you doing?
I'm fine. And you?
I'm doing great.
You were in Spain?
I was in Spain. I went to visit some friends in Barcelona. Yeah.
And how's Barcelona? I've never been there.
I love Barcelona.
Yeah.
I've heard that the Portuguese love Barcelona as well.
Yeah, I think, Barcelona is pretty popular here in Portugal, but I've never been there, so I'm lacking something.
Okay, so one thing I love about Barcelona is that you can walk everywhere.
Really?
Yeah, so here in Lisbon, it's
not like Lisbon?
No, here in Lisbon we have the hills, and
Yeah.
it's somewhat difficult to walk on the cobblestones up and down and up and down. In Barcelona, it's so flat that you literally can walk from one place to another really easily.
Yeah. But it's a bigger city than Lisbon, isn't it? Or
Oh, as far as population, I have no idea. Maybe a little bit bigger,
yeah.
but yeah, it's a beautiful city,
Yeah.
right on the Mediterranean. So it's just beautiful.
Next time I will join.
Next time you come with me, that's great. So today kicked off a very, very important visit in Portugal, and I know he's not here yet.
Yeah.
But one thing I noticed was, and I don't know how often this happens, but they have closed the borders. Did you know that?
I didn't know that. They closed the borders
They've
because
closed the borders.
Yeah.
So for the next 5 days, they have Portugal has pulled temporarily out of the Schengen agreement,
I didn't
closed
know
the
that.
borders, and they will check every single person coming through by air and by sea, by land, to make sure that they're okay to be in the country. Now, why is that?
Yeah, it's a funny thing because something is happening that because of some particular person coming, all other people, they are not supposed to get in so easily. So why is that happening? Because Pope Francis is in town, and we will try to talk a little bit about what do we think about that.
And I mean, this is a big deal, right? So Pope
Yeah.
Francis, the leader of the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, and it's not every day that he comes to Portugal.
Yes,
Is
yes.
this his first visit as
Yes.
as Pope?
As Pope, yeah. The last time there was a Pope in Portugal, it was in 2010, and I really remember that very well because Pope Bento XVI, Joseph Ratzinger, he came here the day that our son Caleb was born.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I have some good Catholic friends like Manel and Philippe, and they were pleading with me that we should call our son
Oh, no,
Bento.
Bento.
Yes, because I love reading Bento XVI,
Okay.
so I'm a huge fan of Bento
He
XVI.
he was much more of a theologian, wasn't he?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. He was a theologian. I wouldn't say that Pope Francis is a theologian. And I've been trying to read almost all the important documents coming out of his pen. I haven't read the last one about love and that one about wedding and marriage
Right,
and that made all the fuss. I haven't read that yet, but I would say that you can call you surely have to say that Bento XVI, Joseph Ratzinger. How do you say Bento XVI in English?
I don't know. What?
Bento 16.
I know that he's Ratzinger, but
Yeah.
for the life of me, I can't remember what his.
Yeah, but he was definitely a theologian. Pope Francis, I wouldn't call him a proper theologian, although of course he knows a lot about theology.
And because of that, it's interesting. I think the Portuguese people love Pope Francis, but they weren't quite sure about Ratzinger. They weren't quite sure about him. I guess they felt he was a little colder,
Yeah, probably
not quite as animated.
that's just one more reason why I loved him so much. he wasn't that popular, but he is a really he has a very bright mind. I read one of his books, Jesus of Nazareth. It came in 3 different volumes, and although he's a Catholic, of course, he's the Pope. I'm the kind of Protestant that really enjoyed reading Pope Francis.
Right.
I felt that when I was reading Pope Francis, Ratzinger, when I was reading Pope Bento XVI, my faith could be stronger. And unfortunately, this is something that I don't feel when I read Pope Francis. I'm not saying that I've been learning a lot from Pope Francis too, but it's very different.
Yeah, it was interesting. We went to Rome this year and toured the Vatican, and it was interesting because the guide pointed out, and I hadn't quite thought this or processed this, but he pointed out, he said, here we are, and we could see into the garden, and there's a small house in the back, and he said, that's where the other pope is.
Yeah.
And so it's really fascinating to think that in this moment of history, we actually have two popes, not because of division, like happened in the past when there was a pope in France and a pope in Rome, but now we have two popes because one resigned, and we have a new one.
Yeah. Of course, we always have that kind of conspiracy theories that say that in some way Pope Bento XVI is a kind of hostage inside the church. I wouldn't necessarily follow that, but it's not that common having two popes. And I have to confess that I was really sad when Bento XVI renounced. I don't say if you say renounced, because
renounced the papacy.
After witnessing all of John Paul II's suffering and enduring till the end, I kind of felt like that Pope Bento XVI, he could go to the end too. And in a way, for me, it was like the old Polish Pope, having the hardest life possible. And then you have this German guy whom I love, but kind of, in a way, he looked like a tourist if you compare to what the Polish one did. And I was sad. I would enjoy watching the end of Pope Bento XVI being a pope. But okay, he decided that.
It is what it is. Right. So now, with the Pope Francis coming to Portugal, obviously a visit by the Pope is a big deal. Portugal is a primarily Catholic country, but there's a bigger reason behind all this, right? So it's the 100th anniversary of Fatima. So explain exactly what that is.
And I'm not a specialist, but 100 years ago, so there was these three little kids. They were they were shepherds.
They were shepherds, yeah.
And so they said that they saw the Virgin Mary, and they saw Virgin Mary for a period of time, and then in October. So this was May the 13th, in 1917, and then October the 13th, there was this general vision. So lots of people said that they didn't saw the Virgin Mary, but they saw the sun doing a kind of strange thing, and that was perceived as a manifestation. Could we say that? And so, in a nutshell, this is what it's said that happened.
Do you think that, because I think in the apparition or the appearing, Mary communicated things to these three shepherds. Do you think that just Portuguese in general know what was communicated or what the apparition was about?
My take on the subject is a very particular one, because you can hear about the three secrets. I guess it's three, the three secrets that the Virgin Mary told the three little shepherds. But in a way, I would say, as a Protestant living in a Catholic country, I would say that Catholicism is not so much about what you heard, what the word was, but about what your eyes saw. And in that way, I would say that Roman Catholic Portuguese people, they don't care that much. I'm not saying that they don't care, but I would say that they don't care that much about the proper words that alleged, how do you say, alegadamente,
alleged words,
of the Virgin Mary, but it burns more on people's hearts, in people's hearts, the thing about watching, seeing the vision. It's more about the vision. Catholicism, I would say, is more about what you see and not so much about what you hear. About what you hear is more about us Protestants. We are more word-oriented.
And so you would say the celebration is more about what happened instead of what was communicated.
Of course, there are lots of people that will take very seriously the secrets, and it was about one of the secrets. I guess it's about something that was going to happen with a man in white that was John Paul II when he came when someone tried to kill him, and other things. It was about Russia. And world politics in general. But people will not go that far trying to understand or trying to talk a lot about that. Fatima gathers people because of going there, because of the experience. And it's more about your eyes than your ears.
So this is fascinating. As evangelicals in Portugal, what do we think about all this? How do we approach?
But let me try just to make a small sabotage. I want to answer you, but because one of the things that is really for me, it's new and it's different. Catholicism was here before than the country.
In the country, that's right. It's older.
We are a country, and we have to understand that. We as evangelicals in Portugal, we have to understand that we cannot ask the Roman Catholic Church to be a church among other churches, because it was the Pope, the guy who was going to say that you are free to be a country. So you had to depend on the Pope.
That's right.
So that you could be born as a country. And so Catholicism was here before Portugal was Portugal. And so for me, although I'm a Protestant, I'm an evangelical Christian, for me, the idea of talking about religion and not talking about the Pope is a strange one, although I'm a Protestant. Because in my country, in Portugal, every time you talk about religion, you have to get to the point that you talk about the Pope or the Roman Catholic Church. But you come from a country where things doesn't happen like this.
No, not at all. Completely different.
And for me, it's kind of alien life. Mark, please explain to the Portuguese listeners, how is it possible to be in a country like the United States, where you can talk a lot about religion and you can be a Christian and the Pope not being such an important issue?
Yeah, and I think that's maybe the fascinating thing about the United States, just generally speaking, is that because it became the United States so much later and in such different circumstance, that there was not this pressure of that long history of the Catholic Church or anything like that. And so it really, and of course the United States was founded in a very different way. It was founded on the principle of the right to practice whatever religion. And so there wasn't a predominant religion that guided that. And so although even today we could say that most of the United States, or a large majority, is Christian, and of course that term is up for debate on what percentages and stuff, it's fascinating to see that the influence isn't there. So that's, I would say, is the first thing, is we don't see the overwhelming influence in the United States from Catholicism, because it's one of many. It's one of many thoughts or religions in that sense in the United States. And so we can very quickly forget the influence that the Pope has in the world. Not only just here in Southern Europe, but around the world as well, South America and Africa and as well. And so for us coming here, it is almost a shock to see how influential the Pope can be.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so that makes us wonder, what is this about? Why is it so influential? Why is the whole culture and country influenced by Roman Catholicism and the Pope? And we see it so differently, where our freedom allows us to not even question that. And so it's absolutely fascinating.
Yes. And do you know that I guess that it's possible to breed some kind of animosity against the United States of America because of your ability to inhabit a world that seems to be out of history.
Right.
For religious people in Portugal, to think that you can be such a big country, such an influential one like the United States of America, and Catholicism not being able to play a decisive role, it kind of it's like the USA could bring the pretension of being a country outside of world history, and that's
absolutely.
a funny thing about the US.
It is, yeah, and because in a sense it's not encumbered by that history or that long the development of Catholicism in Europe and what that did, and so the United States in a lot of ways was just this big do-over. It really was, where anything is possible.
Yeah,
and so that affects how Americans look at the world. And of course, Americans, I think, are short-sighted because of this. They don't recognize the long history of Europe and what that means from the old world. And so things seem simpler in America, where we've talked about that, where in Europe everything is much more complicated.
You should write that down. America, the United States of America, this is not a country. This is a big do-over.
It's a big do-over. It is. It is.
You should write that down.
That would be a great book, the big do-over.
Yeah, you have to write that book.
But I think here's what's interesting to me. As Catholicism has grown in the United States, here's what's fascinating to me. I think Catholicism in the United States represents a type of evangelical Catholicism.
Yes.
Whereas evangelicals here represent an evangelical Catholicism. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so each being so influenced by whether a new world or the old world.
Yes. Could you illustrate that? Because I think you're right on the money on that.
So when I talk to Roman Catholics in the United States, sometimes they use evangelical language. And I kind of question, I go, what's the big difference?
Yes.
But then when I'm here, I talk to evangelicals and I think you're more Catholic than the Catholics.
At your place, oh yeah.
Right. So,
and could you say something good about American Catholics and something bad about Portuguese evangelicals?
Fantastic. You're going to put me in hot water. I think that in America, and this is typical of...
I will try to do the opposite, I'll say something.
In America, and this is very typical of the country in which we live and the freedom we have, is that you can quickly find areas of agreement faster. And so there's much more, it's much more centered on this is what the word says, and so this is what we need to do. And so there's a lot more action involved with the response. Let's, for instance, abortion. There's a lot more connectivity between Catholics and evangelicals in the United States to fight against abortion. And so and I think here there's quite a big delay in that social action that's happening across the board. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, completely. Would you say completely when you ask me?
Absolutely.
And one of the bad things with us Portuguese evangelicals, what would you say a bad thing coming out of the fact that in a way we are culturally Catholic and bring...
Yeah, I would say that sometimes, and this is a huge generalization, so please don't take this in the wrong way, but sometimes when we look at some of the evangelical communities in Portugal, we realize that they haven't made much of a jump from their Catholic heritage. And so sometimes even a church reflects the Catholic culture so much so that they blur the lines of distinction. And so even to the point where we've visited some churches and we've said, this evangelical church is being run by a mini pope. Do you see what I'm saying? The pastor is a type of... I'm going to get in so much trouble.
No, you're not.
But
you're a pastor here, so you can say that. I totally agree. And you know, this is something. This is about my personal history. So, personal history or personal story?
Yeah, personal history story. Yeah.
So, but for me, I would say 15 years ago, I discovered some really good Catholic writers that were hugely influential for me, like Chesterton.
Yeah, yeah. Love Chesterton. Yeah.
And so at that time, and lately, the great Flannery O'Connor, although she was more about writing crime stories.
Right.
Like, well, not only crime stories, but because she her books about when she has to explain why she writes the way she writes, she's really superb. Yeah. But I was saying this because suddenly I realized that if you were a Catholic, but if you belonged to a culturally Protestant country, your Catholicism would be very different. What you were saying.
Exactly right.
And so you were more action oriented, because although you are a Catholic, you still belong to a Protestant culture. So yeah, I think, and now trying to say something good out of being a Portuguese and being in the eye. The storm of this Catholicism and Protestant thing. One of the good things that I feel, and how would I say this? I believe that I have to respect some kind of my cultural Catholic heritage.
Sure.
I don't think that all of my Catholic heritage as a Portuguese is a bad thing.
Right. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
No. Exactly. And this is what gets me even more Protestant, because I try to have the ability to understand some good things about a Catholic culture.
Exactly.
And so you know this because we talk about this a lot, but I enjoy in a country where the majority of the people is Catholic, in a culturally Catholic country, religion can be more unashamedly strange. And this, I don't believe it's a bad thing.
Right.
Because in a way, although I'm a Protestant, in a Protestant culture, there's this pressure that you have to understand everything. And in a way, sometimes it really gets things very thin, very
I think what it does
superficial.
is it blurs the line. Whereas, and I would ask you that, do you think that between evangelicals and Protestants in Portugal, evangelicals, Protestants, and Catholics in Portugal, is that line blurred, or is that line very distinctive right now?
For us, I think it's a mess, because in a way, and I'll just try to give a glimpse of almost 100 years of Protestantism in Portugal. It's a mess because, in a way, if you are a Protestant in Portugal, you tend, in the old days, you'd have to be strongly anti-Catholic, anti-Catholic in a really anti-Catholic way. And in a way, it was justified, because I always remember this story from our family. My grandfather, my mom's father, he was a pastor, and when he moved to pastor this small church in Guimarães, at the north of the country, there was only a girl in my mother's classroom that was not forbidden by her parents to talk to my mother, because all the other kids in the classroom, they were forbidden. Do you say forbidden?
Forbidden to talk.
To talk to my mother, because she was the daughter of the Protestant pastor that got to the city. Imagine? So this was 50 years ago. So because it was not easy to be a Protestant, so you were you had to be anti-Catholic. In a way, you had to be. Right now, we got to the other extreme, that for an evangelical kid, and if he lives in a place like Lisbon, no one cares about your religion, so no one is going to give you a hard time because you're a Protestant. Or not, at least not something like it used to be with my mother. And so you get to the point where evangelicals, you start hearing this kind of phrase of, oh, for me it's not that important to say that I'm an evangelical Christian, which is not a good place to be at the same time. I don't believe this is a good thing, but only to say that it's not easy for us to have nowadays a clear distinction about what it means to be an evangelical Christian in Portugal. And because we spend a lot of time running away from prejudices against evangelicals, mostly because nowadays we are portrayed as something crazy coming out of Latin America because of Brazilian immigration. So yeah, it's messed up.
Yeah.
It's messed up.
Yeah, I think too. Do you agree with this, that evangelicals in Portugal still feel almost persecuted? So they still feel like we're the minority. We're so small, we can't really say who we are, that kind of feeling.
It's not I wouldn't say it's a very, it's not a thing that we think about that well, about that. But I would say it grows on you. It's something that, in a way, that at the same time you cannot escape. Just to give you trying to give you an example. It's not difficult for evangelicals in Portugal to think that they are not that well known, because there's this kind of Roman Catholic conspiracy in power, not permitting any other religion to be known. This is a caricature, but in a way I think it's a caricature that even if you don't consciously take that, there's somewhere in your heart where the caricature is still going on. And I wouldn't say this is very fair to Catholics, and it's not very fair for evangelicals, because it's a way of making things simple that I don't believe it's reality.
Yeah. So what do we do when the Pope comes to visit and visits Portugal? What does an evangelical think about this? Does an evangelical care about this? Should an evangelical care about this? Where do we go with this?
Nowadays, I would repeat, but I would say that it's getting stranger, because in the old days, you'd try to disconnect from the world, which was a good thing that we were used to do as evangelicals in Portugal, being disconnected, and you would try to disconnect. And when you would speak to other evangelicals, you would generally just complain and say that this is the end times. So this is a catastrophe. But nowadays things are not that simple, because in some ways, and I want to be fair, but there's other thing lurking at the opposite side of this, which is I would say that it really, to be sincere, it really bothers me. There's this way of right now of evangelicals try to belong to the party. So, man, if the Pope is coming, I'm not going to skip that party. And so suddenly I feel that there's this temptation about you want to show everyone that although you are an evangelical, and probably you don't agree with lots of things about Catholicism, but although you are an evangelical, you want to be seen as belonging to the good things about Pope Francis coming. And I would say that's not, for me, it's not that interesting.
Do you think in today's world, especially with Pope Francis, because I think Ratzinger was very polarizing, but of course, Pope Francis is very different. So would it be a really bad thing for an evangelical, a Portuguese evangelical, to say, I don't agree with this Pope, or I'm against the Pope, or I don't agree with him here and here and here? Is tolerance such a huge thing right now that it's even seeped into how evangelicals see and react to the Pope or Catholicism?
I'm going to try to answer your question in a very Portuguese way. So
Good.
I'm.
Are you going to make it super complicated?
The way, probably I will, but it's my way. It's our Portuguese way of trying to answer the proper way,
Right.
and you know that.
So don't say yes or no.
Yeah, yes. Don't say yes or no.
That would be very American way.
And we don't have the I don't know where is it located in our body, but we don't have the place in your body where you are able to answer a question in a simple way.
It's in your elbow, because don't the Portuguese have an expression where you talk through your elbows?
Yes,
is that right?
probably.
So it's right here in your elbow.
So I have to train my elbow so that it can. But not forgetting what you asked. My problem. Let me talk a little bit about my personal problems, because I have some of them. I have this difficulty with Pope Francis, because I would say that he's portrayed as a man of good intentions, and in a way, the Pope. People look at the Pope like he's a sheep among wolves.
Right. Okay.
And so, and I have a problem with this, because I don't know any worse way of defending a man's character than this. If you are going to love someone because of this person's good intentions, in a way you are saying that there's no hope for a bad person.
Right.
And I don't want to get too much into anthropology right now, but this is a thing that really turns me off about Pope Francis. The kind of good guy in the midst of the bad guys. He's all by himself in the Vatican, trying to bring everyone back to the church. And so this kind of purity figure about Pope Francis, for me, it's really troubling, and I don't want to go too far, but because I think that on its base, if you are going to think this way, you can get to a point of I would say moral racism.
Yeah.
What do I mean by that? Moral racism is you kind of you make a division in the world about good guys versus bad guys, and of course Pope Francis is a good guy because everyone else in the Vatican is a bad guy, because no one believes in institutionalized religion, and so this Pope Francis is a really good one because it's not about institution, it's about people. And man, I have a problem with this, because in a way, for me, the gospel of Jesus Christ is the cure for the morally sick. And so for me, it's easier to try to understand the bad guys and not the good guys, because most of the time I don't feel like a good guy. And so probably I'm using some Protestant categories, thinking the way I'm thinking, but I'm trying to be sincere. So with Pope Francis, we tend to have a sharp distinction between the good ones, the Catholics fighting for tolerance, the Catholics fighting for environment, the Catholic,
social justice,
social justice, against the bad ones, those who don't. And so Pope Francis' popularity, I think it kind of, for me, presents itself more like a problem than like a solution.
Well, and it's fascinating to me because this is almost rebranding.
Yes.
I mean, he literally single-handedly is trying to rebrand and redirectionalize the public's view of the Catholic Church, the institutional church. And like you said, it's almost like doing an end run around the institution and talking about, well, these are the intentions of this man that then circumvent what the institution stands for. So, I mean, what do we do with that?
Yeah, and and for me, I think one of the difficult things about our world right now, at least I'm thinking about the West, is that you don't have that kind of clarity about things. And with Pope Francis, Rod Dreher, the American journalist, he said that Pope Francis was like the president which name we cannot pronounce.
Oh, that's right. We will never say that name.
But because Pope Francis, just like the American president, he would say things without thinking, but then someone comes and tries to clean up the mess.
Right, right.
But the funny thing is,
does the Pope have Twitter?
The Pope, I think he has, but he doesn't use it.
He doesn't use it quite the same.
But one of the funny things is that the Pope will say things that will get the Catholic theologians in trouble. But generally, at least from my Catholic friends, or for thinking about Portuguese Catholics, Portuguese Catholics, they don't care about what the Catholic theology will be. If they hear something like, who am I to judge, like Pope Francis said, they don't care if you can bring that in harmony with all the church's history. They will just say, yeah, this is the Pope that I believe in because he's not all like the others. This guy is he doesn't wear the shoes, the expensive shoes that the other popes will wear. So this is a kind of, really for me, it's a narrative that really turns me off. So
how would you describe it as just a religion of moralism at that point? I mean, which is counter. It's against the gospel of grace. It's against the gospel of Jesus. I mean, how does that work itself out?
I don't know, because in a way, listen, if we are talking about our world in the West, we have a problem with relativism, don't we? Right now, no one wants to be talking about what's good and what's bad. And in a way, Pope Francis, I think, I'm trying to be as respectful as I can, but I think he works in that direction. Every time something has to be said clearly about what the church believes, he kind of gives this middle of the road answers. But listen, and this is where there's a contradiction going on. But when you are so morally evasive, you are the morally good guy, because you're not.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, he always puts himself on the side of the moral right. Or
the weak ones, because right now it's easy, and of course Christianity is about defending the weak. I'm not saying the opposite, but today you can say that in a way that makes you look good, and not being able to say what's true.
And I think this is what's crazy right now today, is that you can't criticize that. And so
you're intolerant if
you're right. And so then how do you even approach that subject? Well, you don't. And then we have this issue where nobody wants to talk about what's actually happening. And so here we have two evangelical guys talking about this. Probably this weekend we're going to be the only ones talking about this.
Yes, because everyone will be talking about anything else, but not necessarily what we're talking about right now. But let me just point the question and trying to hear the answer from you. Because I'm very biased talking about the Pope. I can acknowledge that. I should acknowledge that. Of course, I will always defend myself, saying that I'm reading what the guy writes. And most of the Catholics that I know, they don't care about what the Pope is writing. So for me, it's important to read. But I know that reading what someone is writing is a very Protestant thing. It's not that necessary from a Catholic background perspective. But you, Mark, if suddenly the conversation gets to the point where people are talking about the Pope, and you are with friends, they are not evangelical Christians, what's your take on it?
And that's hard, especially coming from our background, because I think we fall into two extremes. And we've touched briefly about these, but you fall into the extreme of anti-Catholicism. And I think that's not great, because then you're, in a sense, I'm talking about the anti-Catholicism that is just talking against the church and against a person, and in a way that creates problems. And then on the other extreme is that passivity, where we don't do anything at all, or we just stick our head in the sand and we don't want to talk about it. And so the hard thing is finding a balance.
Yes.
And to say, and I think the question that I always want to say is, okay, when I'm talking about the Pope or Catholicism with my friends, it's so easy to get distracted with all of the things. Oh, is Francis a good guy? Or is he morally correct? Or is he guiding the church into a new place, or redefining what it is, or bringing them back to what the church is supposed to be? Or avoiding the other side, which is just speaking bad against this religion that they have, and not caring for people in that sense. And so what I'm forced to do at that point is do what I think every evangelical should do anyway, is argue for the gospel.
Yes. Yes.
And so because of that, I think I can take that conversation off the table and say, and I realize as a Protestant, as an evangelical, maybe Catholics look at me and they say, he only wants to talk about one thing. Right?
Yeah, and they're right.
If, I'll own that. I'll own it, and I'll say, sure. If you want to accuse me of that, I will. I would rather be accused of only talking about the gospel of grace of Jesus Christ and what the Bible teaches us about that. And maybe in the famous words of Martin Luther, here I stand. I
You're right.
do another.
You're completely right, because one of the things that I think we are missing, we Portuguese evangelicals right now, it's the ability to talk about what should be talked about, and it's the gospel. And I can understand. We spend too much time not being a part of our culture, and suddenly we are just eager for people to look at us and they say, "Oh, you're a pretty normal guy too," and I can understand that. But then the temptation is that every time you will be talking about your faith, you'll be trying to defend the good public image that right now suddenly it seems that you can have. And so I'm talking. This is my own sin. It's not other people's sin. And so you start talking about anything, any subject, but the point is always defending your respectability. And this is why the gospel gets irrelevant. Why are you going to talk about the gospel if what your heart is willing is just to present yourself like a good guy? And this is where I
join the good guys.
Joining the good guys.
And that's why I think the gospel is so good, because the gospel is for the Pope. The gospel is for Pope Francis, and the gospel's for me. And the gospel's for every single person in between. And that, to me, makes it about the gospel. It makes it about what Jesus did instead of what I'm trying to do, or what I can convince people, or what the Pope convinces people to do. And that morality, that false morality that we put out there, is all of a sudden taken away, because our goodness is not based on us. In fact, it's based on Jesus Christ, because that's the only way that we can be good.
And that's why you're really nailing it, because that's why when we talk about the Pope or anything else related to religion, for me, we should try to anchor the conversation not necessarily in what the church should be because of this guy here, but what the church should be because of Jesus Christ. This is about Christ. For us, it's about Christ, and that's why you can be with the good guys, and like you were saying, and still you are going to need Jesus.
That's right.
You can be among the bad guys, and you can be a really bad guy, and you are going to need Jesus.
Absolutely.
So that's why I would say this for all evangelicals, Portuguese evangelicals out there. Please go after Christ, not after presenting yourself in a good light.
No, I absolutely agree. But that's a challenge.
Yes.
And I think that's a process that I've learned over the years as well. And I think even coming to Portugal has helped me understand that even more, because all of a sudden I went from a majority Christian country to what would we call evangelical. It's a minority, a very, very small minority in a large, Catholic presence. And so all of a sudden it's turned on its head. And so you realize that really the only thing that we can stand on is the gospel. If we stand on anything else, it's false, it's insecure, it's passing.
You're right. Let me just make you a last question.
Okay.
Would it be possible for you to say that being an American in Portugal, you have acquired any kind of characteristic that you'd say it's culturally Catholic? That right now you can be culturally more Catholic than you were 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
And in a good way.
Absolutely.
So that we can say something fair and fair, not fair, something good about our Catholic friends and listeners listening.
Absolutely, yeah. And I would say, I would point towards and you know this, in America, our faith is so independent.
Yes.
It's so freedom oriented. It's really individualistic in a sense. And so coming to Portugal and seeing the Catholic Church, and then realizing the Catholic Church, small c, the difference, and realizing the corporate side, the group oriented side, the universal church side, emphasized, because that's essentially what we find. And maybe that could be a good aspect of even the Roman Catholic Church is keeping that over the ages. So seeing that even in our evangelical church has been incredible for me to grow in the understanding of the church in community, as opposed to this is my individual faith. And I think that's huge, because I think that's what Americans struggle with, is seeing it so individualistically.
So we could say this to Pope Francis. If he comes here, I think...
If he comes to Lapa.
Yeah, if he comes to Lapa. I don't know if he's planning that, because he'll be staying, it's not that long.
I think he's staying in Fatima. So,
next time we'll get away to get Pope Francis here at Igreja de Lapa. Yeah, that's great. I don't know, we are getting near to the 50-minute mark.
Okay, well, let's wrap this up then, Well, as always, we do want to invite our listeners to come to Lapa, and every Sunday at 11:30 a.m. Here at the Igreja de Lapa. You can check us out on the internet. It's easy to find us. There's directions there. And, of course, we always want to invite you to our English service, which is the last Sunday of every month.
It's not this one. It will be... no, it's not... 2 weeks from now?
Or so. So the 28th of May, I believe, at 5 p.m. So we'd love to have you here, and we'll see you at Lapa.
See ya.